Excuse me, everyone. Can I have your attention, please? There is an injustice going on right under our noses, right on the plates inside of this restaurant. He died so that his brothers and sisters could die and be dead bodies on plates. Join the fight for animal liberation.
The moral argument here is made easier because we're talking about people who are under 18 years old. I think it would be just as important if they were over 18. I think that what you do with your time still really matters. I think that the corrosive influence of political and religious authority in your life still really matters if you're over 18. I don't take lightly at all that there are 30-year-old and 40-year-old people making these same mistakes. But sure, seeing a 14-year-old do it, a 15-year-old do it, the consequences for these decisions, including the decision to get yourself arrested, get yourself put in prison, somehow ethically it's harder for us in the audience to ignore. But if you have a friend who's 30 years old or 40 years old and is making these same mistakes, is involved with this same organization, I'd urge you, take the time to reach out to them.
Being vegan was not enough. I had to do more. I wanted to liberate these individuals.
We got the cops coming. So.
I'm asking all of you to join the fight for animal liberation. As privileged human beings, it is our moral responsibility to do so.
You guys.
It isn't food. It's violence.
Just as you probably look at this video now and think, wow, if that was my 14-year-old daughter, I wouldn't let her do that. Just as you look at this video and think, wow, if I had been 14 years old or 15 years old doing the things these videos, wow, I really would be mixed up. I wouldn't have been able to cope with this. I would look back now and wish someone had reached out to help me. There are 30-year-olds who need your help. Okay? There are people over the age of 18 who need guidance, who need advice, who need help, who need a friend at any age. You could be just as vulnerable in just as difficult a situation as this girl is now. Okay? So she's not the only one, and this is not a problem strictly delimited by age nor gender, male, female, or otherwise. You know, this is a real problem it's a real problem that hurts us all in this generation. And sure, you know, the isolation and the agony of being a vegan in a meat-eating world, sure, I can relate to it. And I can relate to the desperation of people wanting to have friends and wanting to feel like they're members of a powerful social movement, feel like they're a part of something larger than themselves, feel like they're part of the solution and not just part of the problem. And I know what desperate things, you know, people are motivated to do. The problem is there are guys like Wayne Seong who are exploiting that desperation.
Movements are not built by great leaders and figureheads. They're built by masses of ordinary people who all become empowered to make change, first in their own lives, then in their surrounding communities, and then in the world. So what we need to do is build that sort of strong grassroots movement where everyone who walks in the door feels like their voice matters and their power is growing.
Here's a slender young woman, teenager, pouring blood on her face. Why do you think she did that? What do you think motivated that behavior? Who benefits from this kind of publicity stunt? And who's harmed? You know, this particular young woman, Cassie, I've heard her talking about how eager she was to cover herself in manure, another stunt she's known for, another publicity stunt for Direct Action Everywhere. And Wayne was so delighted that this got in the newspapers. I've seen his reaction. He was so happy. So here she is in revealing attire, lying down in a pile of poo. That's what it is. That's the protest. So to my knowledge, she did these stunts while she was enrolled as a university student at University of California, Berkeley. I believe she's now recently graduated. So she was presumably over the age of 18, but I don't know. She was a teenager of some kind. What else went on? Think about the influence this had on the 14-year-old girl shown at the beginning of this video, discussed in the prior video. Think about the role models she's looking up to within this movement. I think the actions taken by Cassie King, probably the main people who are hurt by them, are exactly the younger people who may really look up to her, who may be trying to emulate what is she's doing. She sets out her whole rationale, and it all seems to make sense. Non-violent, disruptive action is how we will all win, blah, blah, blah. If you think pouring a jar of blood in your head in front of a fancy store and a crowd of people would be icky and uncomfortable, just remember the suffering of the animals. Wow, gee, that really seems to make a lot of sense, Cassie. Maybe a 14-year-old would find that, really compelling. But I've got a couple questions for you, Cassie. Number one, if this is like a really legitimate form of activism that you're engaged in here, why isn't it something being done by 30-year-old people, 40-year-old people? Why isn't it being done by Gary Francione, by a man in his 70s who has a Ph.D. and is a university professor, published books, very influential? Why isn't this being done by Ingrid Newkirk? Why is it just you teenagers who seem to be exploited this way by Wayne at DxE? Why do you think that is? It certainly is puzzling. Cassie, you might not know this, but when Wayne founded the organization, when Wayne became your great leader, and nobody elected him. Wayne claims he's been elected. It's a topic for another video. Wayne is the unelected dictator of direct action everywhere. His main claim to authority was that the type of activism he was going to do would be more effective than any other vegan activist group before, be more effective than any other animal rights group before. He was going to professionalize the world of animal rights activism because he was going to take this movement and ground it in the results of social science research. Social science research. There was research and data and evidence that would prove what was effective activism and what was ineffective activism. And you really think there's empirical evidence, that there's data to tell me why teenage girl pouring blood in her face, why that's effective activism, why it is teenage girl lying down in manure is effective activism, why it is a 14-year-old or 15-year-old running into a restaurant or grocery store and screaming at strangers, why that would be effective activism. You think there's a rock-solid case for this? You think Wayne can back up his argument? I've been reading his work, watching his lectures for years now. At least 5 years, 6 years. There's nothing behind it, Cassie. You're as much an expert as Wayne is. And if I add the two of you together, you still have no expertise at all. Wayne began this whole game saying he'd be better than PETA. He'd do something better than people for the ethical treatment of animals. But it's just the same bunch of random, stupid, self-defeating publicity stunts, right? You're really just doing the same thing that made PETA notorious in the 1980s. Oh, what do you know? Here you are receiving an award from PETA. I guess that's why, Cassie, because they really recognize that you're making all the same mistakes they made. Well, what happened to all that social science research? I thought DxE was something new and different, but no. Quote, we also had the pleasure of presenting a Compassionate Activist Award to Cassie King, whose fearless activism has included everything from climbing into a Costco meat freezer to disrupting a SeaWorld show. Wait a minute. I remember seeing videotape of this, Cassie. That's one way to describe what you did, Cassie. Yes, that you fearlessly climbed into a meat freezer. You know what another way to describe that is? that it was a skinny teenage girl in a bikini, in a flesh-colored bikini, lying down in a public display in a grocery store. Why is that, Cassie? Why do you think it is that it's a skinny teenage girl doing that? Why do you think PETA did so many forms of activism in the past that involved slender and fit young women, naked, almost naked, in bikinis? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that form of activism isn't done by Gary Francione, Ingrid Newkirk? Why is it, if this is a legitimate form of activism, why is it being done by 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds? Why is that? Who's exploiting who here, Cassie? What do you think the future of the movement really is? Do you think it's more of this social science research that Wayne has hidden away in an academic desk drawer somewhere? How do you think it is? How do you think it is that we keep coming up with reasons to have skinny teenage girls in bikinis as our form of activism? Do you think there was ever social science research proving that when PETA did it, it was effective? And when Wayne is doing it now, when Direct Action Everywhere is doing it now, you think that's the most effective form of protest? Why don't you look back through history? That's what Wayne claimed he was going to do, right? Is that how we abolished slavery? Is that how we accomplished gay rights? Is that even how we made seatbelts mandatory? Is that how black people in America got the right to vote? You think so? You think so? Girls in bikinis? And look, there's another way to describe that same event, Cassie, of you getting into that bikini, because she was wearing clothes, right? And she stood there and screamed at people, made this lecture, and then she tore off her clothes, revealing the bikini underneath, and lay down on the meat. Some other people in that grocery store might have just said, a crazy lady stood there screaming, and everyone tried to ignore her. That would be another description of what happened. But there's a chain of influence here, right? There are the people in charge of Direct Action Everywhere. The leaders influence the followers. The people at PETA who give out awards influence people like Cassie King. They influence people like Wayne Seung. And then you guys influence the ultimate victims, the 14-year-olds and the 15-year-olds, yeah? But also plenty of 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds who have the same sick mentality as those 14-year-olds. You know what Leonard Cohen said? They are reaching out for love. They will reach that way forever. And here you are, Cassie. Here you are being a role model for those younger kids. Quote, today we got 3 new charges: felony conspiracy, misdemeanor unlawful assembly, and misdemeanor trespass. Yeah. She's made videos talking about this. This is an Instagram post. They're all so proud to get these charges and maybe now finally go to prison. Well, you keep testing the authorities this way. You keep breaking the law. You keep daring the authorities to put you in prison when we all know that you're guilty, when you even boast about how guilty you are. Well, sooner or later, I think you guys will get your wish. You'll get the notoriety of going to prison. And we see here is the influence you have on the 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds. I think she was 15 when this was filmed. This is the same young woman you saw at the beginning of this video. And this isn't the first time she's been arrested. She already described to us how she was arrested for running onto the field at a baseball game. And here she is getting chained up in a protest, the handcuffs, arrested, and taken away. Many people in my audience will remember how this whole game began, with Wayne getting the financial support to start Direct Action Everywhere, crucial support from Ingrid Newkirk, and you'll remember the promises and the philosophy he espoused at that time. Fewer of you will have watched the series of stages whereby DxE diluted and then discarded every fundamental principle that defined why their organization exists, its moral purpose, what it was they were supposed to represent, how they were going to accomplish it. The situation we're in now is that Wayne Seong will not let a new generation take over control of the organization. As of the last I've heard, all of the money is neatly under the control of Wayne and his sister. There have been numerous attempts to try to kick him out of the group, try to return Direct Action Everywhere to some semblance of what it used to be when it was founded, to serve the purposes people actually donated the money to serve. All the evils men do to attain power are minuscule compared to what they will do to remain in power once they have become accustomed to it. A crocodile wandering on dry land is less dangerous than one that has become accustomed to your bathwater. I don't know if Wayne Seong was really dangerous before, but I'd say he's dangerous now.